He endured one of the most horrendous tragedies that one can imagine. His wife and daughter died in a fire. He's here to talk about that, the trauma before, the trauma after the incident, and the organization helped rebuild his life. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio chat app. By the way, download the app today. It is free. And also join us in Breakfast with Champions, also free. I'm there almost every day of the week, every weekday morning. It's a great place to educate yourself, get some motivation, inspiration, and make friends from all over the planet. That's the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio app. Get it today. It is free. Both are free. Get more details online at thebwcinfo.com. Contact us from the state of New Jersey. We have Will Montanaro on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Will is a retired federal agent, and he went through one of the worst tragedies that one can imagine. His wife, Jackie, and one of his daughters lost their lives in a house fire. He's here to tell a story about that, how he rebuilt his life afterwards, and the organization that helped rebuild his life, and now it's part of his mission. The Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation, their website is fehsf.org. That's fehsf.org. Will, thanks for your service, number one, and number two, thanks for telling your story in the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Very much appreciated.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I'll be honest with you, Will, I don't know if I could talk about this, and we have a lot of tough conversations in the show. Reality is, life is not, for most of us, it's not the happily ever after, white picket fence, all that stuff. Some really horrible stuff happens, and that's what occurred to you. Yes,
completely, and you're absolutely correct with that. You know, you wake up every day and you do everything that you do, and you go about your life, and unfortunately, a lot of times what you do is you take things for granted because it's just the normalcy of life, right? You go through how things are supposed to be done. You have a family, and one day everything just destroys up in literal ashes. And, you know, it's tough, right? Because you sit back and say to yourself, you know, this is what I want in life. This is how I want things to go. And then you get thrown for a major curveball.
Right.
And what I've learned is that, you know, life is 10% of what happens, and it's 90% of what you do with it.
That's the thing. And, you know, I was in Breakfast with Champions this morning in the Clubhouse app. If you haven't done that, they're both free. Check it out. And we talked about life and what you bring to life. And the thing was, and not to take away from your story, I just told briefly about my story, and I said a lot of bad things happened, and I was forced into making major changes in my life. It's not because I wanted to, it's because life handed me a bad hand. You got handed a really bad hand, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. You know, unfortunately, the night of January 13th, 2023, I was sleeping in bed like you normally do, and you kiss your kids goodnight. And in the middle of the night, just after midnight, I got woken up by the blaze of, you know, fire alarms going off throughout our home. I got up out of bed, and I had suffered a pretty bad injury when I was younger, so my mobility is not as good without shoes on. So you can imagine when you're just trying to wipe the dust out of your eye to wake up and see what's going on in the middle of the night. And I remember going down the stairs and walking through our kitchen and seeing a huge orange blaze of fire behind our couch up against the wall. And I tried to rush up my stairs as quick as I possibly could. At the time, I looked at my wife and I said to her, we need to get out of the house. And we started moving and started things out. And you know, at the moment when you're going through things, you can train and you can sit back and, you know, prepare for things. But until it really happens, you don't really know what you're going to do. And so at the time, you know, we're thinking, okay, we got to get the kids out of the house. We have things to do. Let's go. And as she went down the hallway, I went down the stairs to clear a path and open up the front door so everybody can get out. You know, amidst this hot black smoke, chaos, and whatnot, I came back up the stairs, went into our bedroom to retrieve a couple of things. And by the time I walked back into the entryway of our hallway from the second floor, I couldn't see in front of my hand. And for the first time in my life, I really said, "Oh my God, I'm going to die." Mm-hmm. And I got on the ground and started crawling, and I got down the stairs and crawled down the stairs, actually. And I got to the front door and busted out the front door, almost collapsing. And much to my shock, I saw my wife and my older daughter outside and not our younger daughter. And I remember looking at her and saying, "Hey, where's Madeline?" And she said, "Well, I thought you were getting her." I said, "You thought I was getting her?" I said, "Okay." So I turned back in the home. I went up the stairs about halfway. I couldn't. The smoke and the heat was just excessive. And I turned back out, and I looked at her. I said, "Look, I'm sorry. Like, we're going to have to wait for the fire department. There's no way in we're getting up these stairs." And she looked at me and said, "Will anybody call the fire department?" And I said, "No, how was I supposed to do that at this point?" So I picked up my phone to call the fire department. And she turned and looked at me and then ran back in the home. And once that happened, I tried to open up the door and get her, and I started screaming, and she did not get up. Obviously, she was gone at that point. She wasn't hearing me. And the police had showed up, and they pulled me away from the back of the house with my older daughter. And unfortunately, both of them were considered dead on the scene, but they were revived at the hospital. I was at the hospital, unfortunately, walking in as they were reviving both of them. And they got them back, but they didn't wake up. And there was a lot of concern and all those things. And I was coughing horrific, black smoke. My tongue was black. My face was black. I got like a literal bomb went off in front of me. And unfortunately, the next morning, I was told that they were both brain dead. And unfortunately, I did one of the worst things. It was toughest things in my life, actually, is signing paperwork of having to let them both go. So that was one of the most trying times of my life. But that was unfortunately what I was dealt with.
And there's no way of sugarcoating this conversation. That's a horrible, horrible thing to go through. And as a father, and I'm married, I have two daughters. They're in their mid-30s now, thank God. I don't know how they survived this long with me as a dad. But
yeah,
it's not something that comes to the forefront of your mind. I mean, I have periodic thoughts of it. What do you do if this happens? What do you do with that? Maybe that's police work. I'm not sure. And so I'm going to do this, this, and this. And it never, ever turns out the way you think it's going to.
No, not at all. And, we've had conversations, and just like you said, I'm a father, and I've had moments in my head where I said, if there was a fire in this house, we should be able to get out the stairs or hear this and that. And, you think about it, but once you're in that moment, and I'm sure one of the things you've learned in law enforcement is the biggest thing to learn is the real world experience.
Right.
You can be taught and trained everything you're there, but once you're actually in it is unfortunately, where you gain the most experience.
And it never turns out the way you think it will. And I went into two burning houses as a police officer, and I got smoke inhalation in both. And this was in the 1980s. And we think nowadays that the new construction, you're safer. And I'm not a fire expert, but there's a lot more toxins. You can be overcome very quickly, very, very quickly.
Right. Yeah, and I learned that, the days following, and you had to set up a wake and a funeral and a memorial and all the things involved with that. I have some very good friends of mine that are in FDNY, and I called them, and, they were naturally concerned to see how I was doing. And I spoke to them and said, look, I thought I had so much more time as I was going through this. I thought I had, minutes, but in actuality, the time was really 30 seconds, because when I first woke up, it was just a hazy smoke. And
30 seconds goes by extremely fast. We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Will Montanaro. He's a retired federal agent. He's heavily involved with the Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation. He's talking about the incident where his wife, Jackie, and one of his daughters were killed in a house fire. You can find us on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. And when we return, we're going to talk about the effects on him, rebuilding his life, and how we wound up where he's at today. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Need a module solution for lab storage? Contact the good folks at Desiccator Cabinets Direct. Their cabinets are stackable and can use either physical or gas desiccant. Go online to DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com. Send them a message via their contact page. For the best value in lab storage, go online and visit DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com. That's DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com. Also available on Amazon.
Hi, I'm Julie Loken, CEO of the Mediacasters, an omni-media company obsessed with Breakfast with Champions every morning on the Clubhouse social audio app. This inspiring community helps me live a bigger, bolder life. And the best part? BWC is free. Download the Clubhouse social audio app today and join me for your daily dose of inspiration in Breakfast with Champions. Both are free. Online at thebwcinfo.com.
Return our conversation on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show with Will Montanaro. He is one of the movers and shakers for the Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation. Their website is FHESF.org. His wife, Jackie, who is a law enforcement officer, a federal agent, and one of his daughters were killed in a house fire. And we made a major mistake, and we're identifying Will as a retired federal agent. He is not. But nonetheless, thank you for sharing the story, because this is just horrific, Will. And to be honest with you, part of me, my wife and I, we're very selfish. We're like a lot of other people. We don't think of things like this. I'm 65. She's almost 60. She's a lot younger than me. But we think we've got 20, 30 more years in it. And then what are we going to do when we're on the front porch and having our coffee and I'm rude to people? How are we going to behave? What are we going to do? Where are we going to travel to? We don't think of the worst case scenario. But that's what happened to you.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. You know, I had sat back many times. I mean, think about it. Prior to this incident, my wife, my daughters, and I were in Italy not too much earlier. Actually, 3 days before the fire broke out. And kind of ironic, my daughter's first experience with death was in Rome. We were there. We went to the Vatican, and it was at the time where Pope Benedict was having his wake. And I can remember very, very intensely walking into the Vatican with Madeline, and she was holding on to my arm, and she looked at me and she goes, "Daddy, what is that? What's going on?" And I said, "Honey, don't worry about it." I said, "This is the former Pope Benedict. He had just passed away." And she says, "Well, is that going to happen to me?" I said, "Not for a very, very long time, honey." I said, "Don't worry about it. You know, this is what they do." She goes, "Okay." And it's pretty crazy to think, because, you know, that moment, I saw the fear in her eyes of saying, "I don't want to go anywhere."
Right.
And I was there as her father saying, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." And after all the incidents and everything that happened, and you had mentioned being a father and a parent, I felt like very much I let her down, because my job as a parent is to protect them.
I was going to ask you, because as a father, and people can talk all they want about sexist roles and all that stuff. Look, I'm an old school guy. And people who have a problem with that, that's fine. That's on them. That's not on me. But part of my job is to make sure my daughters are okay. And I worry about that. Well, I know you do too.
Yeah. Now more than ever, obviously. And prior to that, you know, if anybody even came by the house or came near them or this and that, anytime we went anywhere. I mean, I grew up in New York City, and I brought my girls with me a couple of times to walk through, and I said, "You stay next to me, you come close to me." And, you know, even when you're driving, a normal thing you drive, you want to make sure that you're driving correctly so that the children, the precious children that you have in your vehicle, are okay. And, you know, that's your job. That's the mindset that you always go through. And again, with that incident, my everything was thrown for a loop, emotionally, mentally, everything that I was thinking. I said, what have I done? And
how long have you been married at that point?
At that point, we had been married 10 years.
So it's not like you were rookies at this. And not that there's a good time, but it's like at 10 years of marriage, you start getting the hang of what's expected of you and your roles and all that stuff. And again, I'm not getting into the sexist people that love to get into arguments about that. I don't do that. Your wife, Jackie, was a federal agent, and a lot of people are opposed to that. She was really, really good at what she did from everything I read. Your daughter, Madeline, was very young. But as a father... You know, I can't help but think, how do you deal with this afterwards when you're saying, okay, and I'm not saying this in a judgy way, don't get me wrong, I did not fulfill my end of the bargain. I could not keep them safe. And how do you deal with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had some very trying nights following that incident, following everything that happened. I sat back and said to myself, what have I done? What should I have done different? As you know, hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, coulda, shoulda, woulda all day long.
Exactly. And I sat back for a long time killing myself as to what I could have done, what I should have done. And you know what really humbled me, I'm going to be honest with you, my daughter, who's now 10, she was 9 at the time. It was after her birthday last August. She looked at me, and one day I just broke down. I said, listen, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry for everything that happened. It was, I feel like it's my fault. And she looked at me, she goes, Dad, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She said, did you start the fire? I said, no. She goes, then Dad, why are you upset? It was the fault of the fire. You didn't do this. And it brought me back to reality.
Well, they say the old saying is, well, out of the mouth of babes.
Right.
That must have hit you right between the eyes when you heard her say that to you.
It did. It literally, I felt like my body fall back. And it took her to bring me back to reality and realize what the situation of everything that had happened. And, that child was wise beyond her years. She's very strong. She's committed to what she does. Just in fact, last year she was a part of her school safety patrol. And when they asked, on the application, why do you want to do this? Her immediate answer was, I want to do this because my mommy was an officer and I want to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, you tell her I said, good job. And I'm proud of her. Yeah, one of the things, and I'm proud of you too, Will, because look, this goes back to the earlier part of our conversation. A lot of really tough hands get dealt to people, and a lot of people fold. And I'm not saying it wasn't difficult for you, which we'll talk about, but you didn't fold.
That's correct. No, I didn't. Like I said, I'd gone through some dark times, probably about a good 3 or 4 months of me getting my head together. And I sat back and said, I need to start focusing my life in a different direction. I had been in the nonprofit sector for a long time, and I worked with law enforcement pretty much throughout my career, particularly focused in New York City within the federal agencies and NYPD. And at the time, I was working in an organization as a chief operating officer, and I said to myself, I need to do something else. I need to do something that's going to be a lot more meaningful than what I'm doing right now. And it took the chairman of the board for the organization that I'm currently working for to reach out to me, because him and I had a relationship 10 years prior. And he said, how you doing? I said, I'm all right. I'm going through everything. He's like,
how do you have that? How do you have that conversation? How you doing? You really want to know the truth, or you want the politically correct answer?
You know what? It's the funniest thing, because I've gotten to know some folks, and there are people that I knew prior to what happened to me that unfortunately had lost children in certain incidents. And they had said, people are going to come up to you and say, how you doing? And he said, how do you want me to respond to that?
Right.
What do you want me to tell you?
The truth is, I had that. Well, I don't know what to say to people. I talked with a wife of a buddy of mine who worked for me, who was going to line of duty, and I said, part of me is like spineless. I'd rather chew a hole through a wall than talk to you afterwards. I don't know what to say.
Right.
And she said, you can't make it worse. The worst has already happened.
That's true. Well, it's funny because after everything had happened, it felt like you were almost like a leper walking around. People were looking at you. I was recognized a lot because this was all over the news. And it came to the point where I started wearing a hat and sunglasses when I was going out shopping, because people were coming, oh, you're that guy from the house fire. This is what happened. And I was like, oh, my God, I can't handle this.
Yeah.
And, and the folks that were talking to me, it was just so odd. Like I said, like a leper. You just, okay, great, going through the motions. But the people that actually care about you, it's a different thing. So there are people that have been very close to me. And as you know, through your life, in moments of chaos and tragedy is where you really see the good in humanity, and you see the people that are actually going to do right for you.
And the main thing is just to take action. We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Will Montanaro. His wife, Jackie Montanaro, and daughter, Madeline, were killed in a house fire. Jackie was a federal agent and a hero by all accounts. And we're going to talk about rebuilding his life afterwards and the organization, more of the organization that he's involved with today. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
First thing in the morning on my phone, I join the Breakfast with Champions morning show in the Clubhouse social audio app. Both are free. I can grab my coffee, no makeup, no hair to do, and connect with people live from all across the world to jumpstart my day. Join us in the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse social audio app.
online at www.thebwcinfo.com.
Tired of seeing other people with less talent and skills than you achieve success and wonder why them and not me? You can learn tips to skyrocket your influence and transform the way you communicate for increased profits, success, and more. All online and from the privacy of your home or work. Get more details at letpops.com. letpops.com. That's letpops.com. Return conversation with Will Montanaro on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Will's wife, Jackie, a federal law enforcement officer, and daughter, Madeline, were killed in a house fire. He and his other daughter survived. And we're talking about building a life afterwards. And by the way, he is one of the movers and shakers for an organization called the Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation. Their website is fehsf.org. That's fehsf.org. Well, again, thanks for telling the story. And look, to be totally honest with you, we had to put one of our dogs down a little over 2 weeks ago, and I still have a difficult time talking about it. This is not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, and you're having a conversation where I don't know if I could talk without bursting into tears.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a lot of people tell that to me, that after this, how are you standing here? It's remarkable. How are you doing this? And I picked myself up. I said, it's time for me to get moving. I have my older daughter that survived with me, and it happened for a reason. I'm with her. She needs me, and I need her.
Right.
And I said, I'm standing today and doing everything I can to make sure that her future is where it should go, because I didn't get dealt a really bad hand. She got dealt an even worse hand.
Yeah.
And I'm her only parent, so she looks up to me.
Well,
and if she sees me fall and cower,
you got a job to do. And one of the things that I'm sorry to interrupt you is, I cry in private. I don't do it in public, or I try not to. But I'm sure you have your moments where you sit there and in the dark, where you're alone and you just sob.
Yes, I've definitely had those moments. Without a doubt, that's happened to me. There are things called triggers I've learned in therapy, that sometimes you're having a great day and then all of a sudden you'll see something and it'll just hit you.
Yep.
And those things will happen. And as you're right, you have your moments in private to collect your thoughts and move on. But I've been very good in channeling it and making sure I continue to do good now and move forward and make sure I'm a standing example for my daughter.
Well, that's got to be a driving force for you. You've said several times, and I already got this ahead of time, you still have a job to do. You've got a daughter to raise, and there's other things you want to do as a result of this. How important was that for you to saying, I cannot? My mom used to say this. She says that now. She's like 88. She says, I'm your mother. I don't have a choice no matter. If I'm not going to do this, and she's from New Jersey, and I was born in New Jersey, but I didn't live very long.
Okay.
And she says things like, I'm your mother. I don't have a choice, because if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? And that's where I see you. You're a father. You got no choice in the matter. You got to suck it up, buttercup, and move on.
That 100% with that, correct. You're right. What your mother said is correct. I'm your mother. I don't have a choice. And I'm her father. I don't have a choice. But I've also looked at it in another direction, that my wife and my daughter died in a horrific fashion. And I would not let their death die in vain by letting my daughter see me collapse and therefore have her life collapse. And I was there to say, this is it. We're moving forward, and I'm putting my left foot in front of me and continuing to walk and making sure that she sees that the example is you have to stand up and move forward. And being a father by yourself is extremely challenging.
Yeah.
I never thought I would be in that position. Typically, you have someone else to bounce something off of and say, hey, can you back me up on this one, or something like that? And not to mention, you want to go down a different direction. I'm a man, and my daughter is a female. And, I never expected to have these conversations with my daughter about those things. That was always going to be my wife's job.
Now I know what you're talking about. Never mind.
Yeah. I've enlisted help with those things. And thank God we've had a good family support, but we've had a tremendous amount of community support. I mean, there are people who are around us. Anything you need, let us know. And you know what? It took me a long time to realize that to ask for help isn't a weakness. And I sat back and decided I need some help. And I got a lot of people who do that with me.
It is not a sign of weakness to ask for help. As a matter of fact, a lot of people say it's a sign of strength. I don't get into those arguments. I just know it's what I had to do. I wouldn't have the life today if I didn't find out. And here's an analogy. I love analogies because I'm a little thick-headed. Will. And we could arguably say one of the best quarterbacks of all time was Tom Brady. Whether you like them or not, doesn't really matter. And I'm just saying.
Well, I'm a Jets fan, so.
Okay. Well, then you had no one to turn to. Your last great quarterback was Joe Namath. But we turn around and say that he had incredibly, at the top of his career when he performed, but he had head coaches, position coaches, offensive coordinators, sports psychologists, nutritionists, physical trainers, 10 other teammates he relied on to do their job. And he didn't get to where he was by himself. What makes me think I can?
That's an excellent point. And unfortunately, it took what happened for me to realize that. And I would always do things on my own. I never asked for help. And I would carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. I would feel the stress at night, laying down in bed, and those types of things. And really, it's great to have somebody with you in your life, and someone that you can talk to, and someone explain what you need to bounce something off of, or just in general, have a discussion. And you know what? If you don't have that and you don't reach out and talk to people, you're only going to collapse yourself.
It's so tough. It's still tough. I don't have anything anywhere near as dramatic as you got to go through, but I would still. This is part of my DNA. I don't know what it is. Well, part of me would rather suffer in silence than reach out to you, even though I know you can help me.
I've had many people tell me, "Hey, give me a call, talk to me, this and that." And you're right. I've done the same thing. I sat back, suffered in silence, and I tried to contain it. And when I was able to get myself out of the mindset I was in from when everything had happened, I started realizing reaching out and talking to folks was the best thing to do. And you know what? As you know, in law enforcement, one of the leading causes of death, unfortunately now, is suicide.
Yeah.
And it's because people are doing what we were just saying. They're holding it back, suffer in silence. And you know what? There are people that are good friends. Even if they're not, there are people just a phone call away to talk to.
And I look at, and your scenario is totally different from mine, but there came a time where I crashed and burned and the worst happened, and I was forced into reaching out for help. And I got the help I needed. And you went through the worst possible scenario. Did it take you how many months before you decided I needed to reach out and get some help?
I would say it took me easily anywhere between 3 and 4 months. I pushed myself back to work faster than I should have. Probably 2 weeks after everything happened, I was back at work because I tried to move myself on, but I would find myself having really horrific PTSD, flashbacks of what was going on, seeing the fire, getting out of the house, and then having to see the images of everything following. It took a lot, and one day I was in the office, and it was down a dark hallway, and I'll never forget this. I was walking down a dark hallway, and I just saw red in the background. And I all of a sudden started shaking, and I almost dropped to the ground. And I hysterically started crying. And I got up, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And I reached out to a friend of mine who was in the clinical therapy world. I said, I need somebody because I can't do this. And I never spoke to a therapist. It's not something I ever did. It wasn't in my DNA. And thank God this person reached out, spoke to that therapist, and she got me in that day. And we started talking, and I felt the burdens immediately come off the minute I sat down and spoke to her.
And for many of us, and myself included, I still have periods of time where I reflect back and go, oh, yeah, you need to talk to someone. What's the matter? You can't The truth is, no, I can't handle certain things. And I have a choice in the matter. And still, one of the most difficult things, Will, is deciding at this stage, I'm doing pretty good. I don't need your help. But when I do, making the decision to reach out for help. Have you found yourself, okay, I'm doing okay, but I still find it difficult to reach out and ask someone to help me?
I would say now my mindset is different. But yeah, I'd say partly because there are times where I say, well, I've got myself through this so I can be fine. And then I revert back to myself saying, you remember what happened? Let's reach out to somebody.
Yeah, I can imagine me in a similar role. We're talking with Will Montanaro, his wife Jackie, who's a career federal law enforcement officer. and one of his daughters, Madeline, were killed in a house fire. And he's one of the movers and shakers of Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation. We'll talk about that transition in a few moments. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. More heading your way. You don't want to miss. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. What is the Newsbreak app, and why should you follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app? Newsbreak is your #1 local news app for current events, free live news for you and your community. Download the Newsbreak app today for free, and be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Return conversation with Will Montanaro on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. His wife, Jackie, was a career federal law enforcement officer, and his daughter, Madeline, they were killed in a house fire where the whole family was awakened, and he and his other daughter got out. They went back in, and they did not make it. And he is one of the movers and shakers of Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation. Our website is FHESF.org, FEHSF.org. Lots of numbers, lots of letters in there, so just remember, Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation. Google search it, you'll find it. It's real easy. I'm not going to ask you about the immediate after effects, because that's an area I would still have a really difficult time talking about. I would think that would be very personal. And to be honest with you, Bill, I don't know that anybody can benefit a whole lot from that. But afterwards, where you had the conversation with your surviving daughter, and she said you didn't start the fire, the fire was responsible, you did the best you could. It still sounded like, even though she hit you right between the eyes, and that was a wake-up call for you, that you had a lot of self-development, for lack of better words, to do.
Yeah. So after she had said that to me, it did awaken me, as we mentioned. I had to start telling myself and really believing and doing the things in everyday life that, you know what, this is a moment to move ahead. And she gravitated to me, and, you know, I'm her father, and I sat there and I really started feeling strongly about what she had said. And, you know, the development of what I did going forward was really because of what had happened, but mostly because, again, my daughter and what she had said to me. Everything from there, it almost was like the next chapter of life opened up. And I, of course, had moments where I sat back and said, I know I could have done better, I should have done better. But it's almost to the point where, you know, you finally realize that this is not something that you did. And the one person I really didn't want to disappoint in this world is my daughter.
Right.
And my daughter does not blame me. And I think that was one of the things I was worried about, is like, does she really blame me? Maybe when she gets older, she's going to say, you know, my dad did this and this is all his fault. And the fact that she accepted me and said, Dad, this isn't you. It wasn't you. And we need to just go forward. And she comes and gives me hugs and shows the love towards me. It meant a lot. And it really just put me in the mindset to move forward. You know, you were talking about the aftermath. One of the most difficult things, aside from having to sign the paperwork of letting them both go, was my daughter wasn't there. And I had to go home and tell her that they had both passed away. And that was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do in my life. And, you know, the one thing I saw from her was that she immediately grabbed on, and she loved her father. And I saw that, and she just propelled me forward.
I'm impressed that you can talk about this. We talked about it many times, that you're not sobbing. But the other thing is you're staying relatively composed. You're not obviously angry. There's still certain things I can't talk about without getting triggered, and I'm air quoting. And I get rather passionate. I get rather disturbed, and it's very obvious. So my hat's off to you. You've done a lot of work. One of the things that Hollywood would have you believe is that everybody that goes through a major traumatic calamity like this, they wind up self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, and their whole life falls apart. And it doesn't matter that they have other children. That's obviously not the path you took. No, it wasn't. You know, it just wasn't. You know, you don't know what you're going to do after everything like that happens.
And, you have certain moments of reflection, and to be quite honest, some depression involved with it. But it's not what Hollywood portrays. And everybody's different. I'm sure there are people that would have gone down a really bad path, but I made sure I wasn't. Because I had to get up every morning and still feed my daughter and bring her to school and make sure that she was doing what she had to do. And I'm not saying that she was my full inspiration as to why I didn't head down that path. It's not in my DNA to head down that path. But I sat there and said, I can either use this as an excuse and fall into the grave, or I can pull up my pants and move forward.
And it's not like it was an either-or proposition. It was not one, we'll do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's like you get busy, what's the old saying, get busy living or get busy dying? And I'm not saying that to be...
That's one of my favorite quotes from Shawshank Redemption, without a doubt.
It's so powerful when you think about it. So You said earlier in the conversation, Will, that you were working in the nonprofit space, but you felt like you needed to do something. Is this, and you got introduced where a friend you've known for a long time from the Federal Enforcement and Homeland Security Foundation, I believe, called you and said, hey, how you doing? How's it going?
Yeah. So Richard Kendall, the board chair, known for a number of years, I mentioned 10 years, we had a Zoom where him and I were just talking, how you doing, how are things? I'd received a grant from them. I didn't ask for it, and they had sent me a check within 24 to 48 hours of the incident that was given to me. And I remember talking to folks, and people were coming there. Now, I had a tremendous amount of community support. We were getting gift cards. There were all kinds of things constantly happening. But what I do remember is when I saw that check in front of me and the note, I said, I know those guys. I know Richard. And I had a little smile to my face when that happened. And after him and I spoke and he reached out, I felt the humanity, the touch, how things were going. And the darkness began to turn light. And him and I spoke. And after several months of conversation, he said, you'd be the perfect person to run our organization. I'd love for you to be the CEO.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Again, it doesn't seem to be realistic. You went from not involved to CEO like that.
Well, my previous assignments would have dictated that I'd be good in the job.
Okay, so you had some background.
I had been raising funds and working with the law enforcement community for a long time, which is how him and I had met. But he had known my background, and being one of the grant recipients from the foundation, and the personal conversations him and I have had, he knew the type of person I was and the character I stood for. And, over the months as we spoke, I met with some of the other board members, and they wanted to make sure that they concurred with his thought. And they resoundingly said, we want you to do this. Who better than you to talk about what we're doing than anybody? So I humbly and happily accepted. And I can tell you, I've never been happier. I feel like this isn't a job for me. It's a labor of love, because so many people turned and helped from me, people that I didn't even know of, thousands of people across the country reaching out to me and did things for me. So I said, I'm going to turn this to help out for other people like so many did for me.
Sounds like it was a conscious decision on your part that I'm going to give back. Yes,
without a doubt. I just knew it was the thing to do. It was something I had to do. And being that my wife was a federal law enforcement officer, what better organization for me to stand up and lead and put into a new direction and make us large and tremendously successful than the Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation.
See, one of the things you said earlier was the financial aspect of it is important. I'm not minimizing that, but you said there was an emotional connection, and I'm paraphrasing. How important was that to you?
Incredibly important, because not only, especially with my current job, do we just give out funds to help out these families that are in tremendous need in the federal law enforcement world, but we show an emotional human side to this. Because, yes, the financial aspect is extremely important. As I've mentioned many times, when things like this happen, line of duty deaths, tremendous accidents, sicknesses, people need time to focus on the incident that had happened in front of them. They need that moment. And the last thing they need to worry about is financial assistance, and that they worry about, the finances that are in front of them. They have to pay bills. How am I going to do this? And the foundation came in to make sure that part of it was addressed for me, as well as others. But the human touch was really the most important thing, because it showed they cared.
And the other thing, too, is I can see myself not wanting to ask people for help financially. because again, that goes the old school roles that this is the role I'm supposed to play, and doesn't really matter. So FEHSF.org. Just do a Google search for the Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation. You will find it. Can people contact you there?
Yes, they can. And we consider ourselves the financial first responders. Our motto is that they have our backs and we have theirs. And, people need to understand, as you know this as well, when a law enforcement officer goes to work, it's not the officer that's just putting the uniform on. The family does as well.
Right.
And families need to make sure that, they are taken care of and that there are other people there for you. And you don't ask for money. I didn't ask for money, but people saw that, and that was the good in humanity. And that's what we want to do to help people, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Well, thanks so much for agreeing to tell your story on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Very much appreciated.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and this was a phenomenal interview, and I appreciate it very much.
A huge thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast version of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, by the way, which is a nationally syndicated radio show. And we broadcast on over 115 radio stations across the United States to more than 44 million combined population. If you like our show, there's two simple things you can do. Go to our website, letradio.com. Add your favorites. Check it often. You can find episodes of the show right there. And the second one involves our Facebook page. It's so easy to find great content, including past episodes of the show. And when you see something that you like, that resonates with you, be sure to share it with your friends. We'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.